Welcome everybody to today's session in conversation with Nickie Aiken. We'll hear from Nickie today on her background working in communications and how that's helped her during her time in Parliament and as an MP. We'll just give a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes for people to join. I can see we're up to 30 here, so I'll just wait for a few more people to join before we start off. This session today is specifically carried over people's lunch break, we hope. It's an informal session. We've nicknamed them Lunch and Learn, and they're fairly relaxed and they're open to questions at the end as well. There's also a more formal session that Nickie will be running on the 4th of February called Crisis Management and Public Affairs. I'm Louise Whatham. I'm from the PRCA, and I think we have the numbers joined now. So, Nickie, if you're ready,
Certainly am.
and if you'd like to introduce yourself, and if you're happy to give an overview of your background before you started as an MP, and kind of why it's considered important.
Thanks, Louise. And hi, everybody. Great to be with you today. As Louise said, I am Nickie Aiken. I was the Member of Parliament for the cities of London and Westminster from 2019 to 2024. But before that, I was in communications. I still am in communications now. I started my career as a junior account exec in a PR agency in Cardiff, working on a wide range of professional services clients. Then I got involved in the Conservative Party press office and became a press officer, which was absolutely fascinating. And that's when I really got to understand the news agenda and how you can work with reporters and editors, producers to get your messages across. Then I joined the Children's Society, a charity in London, and was the first, I think we were the first charity to do celebrity fundraising. Took some celebrities off to walk the Great Wall of China, and that was fascinating. And then I started working really for Bradford and Bingley, and which was the bank, and I was head of PR there, and did a wide range of consumer, corporate, B2B, crisis management, you name it, we did it. And obviously we had the banking crisis in 2008-9. Bradford and Bingley went under. It was taken over by the government and sold to Santander. And I learned a lot about crisis management in those in those times. And in about a year, I think all I did was crisis management. And I think my background in communications really helped me as a politician. I was a local councillor at Westminster City Council, which runs central London, and was responsible for public protection and licensing, and then became leader of the council. And I think having a career and knowledge and experience of communications and knowing how important it is to communicate your message to wide range of stakeholders, I think was critical for what I do believe was a successful political career. I didn't get voted out. I think I was successful in 5 or 6 elections in my time, and I do think there's huge synergies between proper communications and good politics. And obviously, I've been involved in public affairs now, having been a local and then a national politician for 16 years. And I've learnt, I guess, professionally as a communicator, but also as a politician, how important public affairs done well is to the general public, the public relations, communications strategy can be. So that's why I've been working with PRCA, putting together this new webinar. So it was a 3-hour online training session. I did a lot of training for PRCA before I became an MP. I did about 3 or 4 different types of courses: crisis management, public affairs, political campaigning, etc. So now I'm bringing everything I've learnt, particularly as a politician, to this new course to showcase how I think communication specialists and public affairs people can really learn how to use public affairs during a crisis, because I do think quite often the public affairs angle can be forgotten, and I think it's a crucial part. So that's me in a few minutes, Louise.
Thank you. So I did have a question. I have a couple of questions, if it's okay. I suppose the starting point for me is so my background in public affairs as well. It's often considered a standalone discipline as something kind of related to communications, but something quite separate. Could you comment on kind of why do you think that's helpful, and where is
Yeah.
that come from? And do you think that's still the case now, or do you think that's changing?
I do think public affairs has always been seen as a separate entity to the wider communications toolbox, if you like. And I think also it has had in the past a reputation for slightly being involved in the dark arts. It's all about lobbying, and I think particularly its reputation in the United States is very different to what it actually happens in the United Kingdom. And I think not working with public affairs experts, your colleagues within the wider communication strategy and teams is a missed opportunity, because public affairs is a vital tool, particularly today in the type of politics that we are moving towards, very much campaign led politics, very much social media led politics. And a lot of the more senior politicians have got very media savvy. And so it's important that public affairs teams do work with their colleagues from across the communications field to ensure that all messages are understood and are, included. We must never forget politicians are, I think, a very, very important stakeholder in the wider communications field.
Yeah. You've talked a little bit there about politics and public affairs. Just interested in, you started to sort of go into a little bit there, but what would you say are the recent changes as that's working through in policy development? Could you kind of comment on what, I know you've kind of inferred that that's a positive. So do you think the current approach to public affairs, kind of the environment, how is it linked to the impact on policy? Are you seeing those outcomes yet?
I think we certainly have over the last decade. I think brands, organisations, companies now understand or are doing more integrated public affairs into their wider communication strategy, and that policy, if you're trying to change your policy, public affairs doesn't lie in isolation. If you want to change a policy, so for example, say with all the work that has been going on with the menopause and trying to lift the menopause as a subject to empower women not to suffer in silence, that they can get help. Also to educate employees and employers about the importance about having menopause policies. And I think we've had politicians like Carol Harrison, the Labour MP in Swansea, really leading the charge on that, but bringing politicians from across the political field. I was involved in it in her APPG. I think I was co-chairman or vice chairman, I can't remember now, but it was really important. And then we had other companies then getting involved to support us and having their own menopause policies. And we did persuade the government to change some policies, some laws, where now women can only pay £18 or one, I think it's one prescription charge, for an annual prescription charge for HRT. So you can do that. You're seeing that now with the farmers, the UK farmers. The NFU is very much lobbying the government about their ridiculous inheritance tax changes, but are also then using the media to amplify their ask to public affairs. So I think, it's got to be part of the mix, and it can't just be seen in isolation.
Okay, so you've talked there a little bit about mainstream media and the link with that, and that's having a positive impact because people are kind of working across different disciplines to feed into policy formation. The other question I was thinking to ask you is, as we start the new year, are there any changes that you'd like to see in the industry? So there's closer working together, but are there any changes that you'd anticipate happening,
Well,
like to see happening in our industry?
Look, I think our industry is excellent, whether it's public affairs or public relations.
I agree.
I think we've come a long way over the last 20 years, particularly. And I think it's thanks to organisations like the PRCA who have really helped working with members, organisations and and individual members to really professionalise the PR and PA industries. I think, or sectors. I really think that it's come a long way, and it's taken much more seriously now. And you can tell that by the number of journalists who want to get into PR. They see it as a good progression. So I think we've come a long way. I think there's still some work to be done in many areas to integrate public affairs and not to see public affairs as a standalone. And I think, as I just mentioned, there's a few good examples where companies are using their lobbying and public affairs teams as part of the wider communications strategy. But I still think there's a long way to go. And I do think also from a crisis management point of view, I think there's a particular a very, very vital part that public affairs colleagues can play when there is a crisis. It's so important to be able to be speaking to politicians, regulators, civil servants, whoever it might be, local councillors, whatever the crisis may be, but to make sure that the public affairs teams are doing their bit, sharing the messaging, providing reassurance, providing answers, and then afterwards, helping to in the recovery stage of a crisis and the rebuilding of a brand or rebuilding of an organisation's reputation. The public affairs team has got an equally important role to play as the communications teams. And again, I think the course that we're working on at the moment on the 4th of Feb, I think it just is a gentle reminder in a way that the public affairs teams have a big part to play, but also if you haven't got a public affairs team, why you need one, or why you need an agency, or why you need to just upskill yourselves.
Yeah, I should have said at the start, actually, we're open for questions as well. So I can see the numbers who've joined have gone up. So if you do have a question for Nickie, please type it in the Q&A, or you can send it across directly. And we'll put a link as well in the chat to the course on the 4th of February. That's Crisis Management and Public Affairs. Nickie, I wanted to ask you, kind of from a selfish point of view. So I went into public affairs after I graduated from university 20 plus years ago, and I suppose that was one of the things that I noticed. We only just started using the internet and email and things like that. And when I went to work in Parliament for MPs, there was a reluctance there to use modern communication methods. And I was quite surprised that there was that reluctance, because I thought it was brilliant. We can now email people and do all of this. I'm just wondering if, because that was obviously 20 years ago, has that changed in Parliament? And yeah, if you could.
Yeah, I think emails happen. I think it was funny because I was talking to the last time I was in Parliament, I was talking to somebody so we have bill committees in Parliament, which is, where a group of MPs selected by the party whips will scrutinise a bill. And if it's not a subject that you're particularly interested in or have no knowledge in, and you're basically doing, and no, believe me, we do, of all parties, will do a favour for the whip by sitting on the committee. And you don't do much necessarily. And there have been times where I've been told that MPs, in the old days, used to bring all their correspondence in and spend the bill committee period just signing their letters,
Yes.
which I find incredible because I would get 200 emails a day.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many letters these MPs got in those days, but signing maybe 30 or 40 letters in an hour or something, or top and tailing and checking them is
Yeah.
one thing, but email has it's transformed the way the electorate can tell an MP how they feel
Hmm.
about a certain subject. And believe me, I would get 600 emails about Dominic Cummings going to Barnard Castle, and each one of them deserves a response. And so I think it has changed. I think it provided us with the ability to be closer to our constituents, and our constituents feel that they have got a voice. And I think social media has changed that as well. And there obviously are a number of MPs who you wish would come off Twitter or X, but they never will.
Yeah.
But social media for me, although it has its downside, of course, people will be abusive and threatening sometimes. But in the vast number of cases, it allows us to communicate. And it allows us, I would never change policy or whatever via Twitter, but but Twitter provides an element of a communications tool, and we should embrace it and not be afraid of it. But there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah. Just, I haven't, I hope it's okay to ask it. Do you think that there's a gender divide in there as well between social media platforms
Well, I
with,
know that a lot of female politicians of all parties, and I've been involved in panels with female MPs from
Mhm.
other parties who have had absolutely outrageous experiences on social media and having, death threats, rape threats. Um, touch wood, I never had that.
Mhm.
But I do think women in general, whether it's an MP or whatever, they are treated differently on social media. I don't know why that is. Things like X, Twitter, um, can be quite aggressive in tone. And I never really used Twitter that much. I've always used Instagram and Facebook because one, you've got more space. And I've always found them both more of a pleasant experience. And you obviously still get your detractors. You still can get threats, but I usually just delete them.
Yeah. I think I tend to think the same as well. I don't really, yeah,
I once had somebody really criticize me on Twitter. It was a green politician, and he really had a go at me. So I just deleted his comments and blocked him. And then he emailed me to say, "How dare you block me? It's my freedom of speech." And I was like, "Well, you can say whatever you want about me and my
Mhm.
policies, whatever, but you can use your own platforms. You're not using mine."
We've had a question that has come in from one of the audience. They has I'll just read it out here. Can I ask Nickie what things some organisations who are moving away from Twitter or X sorry, can I ask Nickie some things about organisations who are moving away from Twitter and X because their workplace is currently considering this? And would you have anything to say on?
Right. Look, I think I don't. Look, I've said I don't really use Twitter. I use it for news gathering. I
Mm,
don't really use it to say anything these days. Well, one, because I haven't got much to say because I'm not a politician anymore. But also, but um, an organisation has got to decide what communications tools best suit their brand, their narrative, their strategy, and
yeah.
if they and it's all part of a communication tools audit, if you like. there are plenty of platforms now that you can use. Twitter has obviously got, wasn't it, 1 billion users or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And it has gone down a certain direction under Elon Musk. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's a different path. And brands have to decide whether they want to use it or not. I mean, and if they don't, fine. They can. There's plenty of other communication tools they can use.
Okay. Um, just to kind of talk, because we've just got a little bit of time left, could you talk about the course that you're running in February, and kind of the specifically what sort of crisis you'd
Yeah,
imagine would arise in public affairs, kind of how it might be different to other crises, and
yeah.
if you've experienced this as well. I'm guessing that you have.
So the course brings the two things that I am probably most experienced in within communications, which is crisis and public affairs. And having been a senior local councillor and an MP, I have noted in my time that brands, organisations, companies haven't always reached out to me when there's been a crisis to explain the situation, particularly from a local point of view. And I think that it's really important for successful crisis management that organisations do consider a public affairs strand to their crisis management. And it's not rocket science, but I do think, but crisis management isn't rocket science. But we see practically every day, every week, brands and organizations getting crisis management wrong. And so this is a reminder. I suppose it's a reminder of how important crisis management planning is. And it's also a reminder of how important public affairs planning is. And it doesn't mean that you have to have lots of resource if you haven't got it. There are easy solutions to ensuring that your public affairs stakeholders are part of your crisis communications strategy. And we'll be looking at the thing I've always done in my courses is plenty of case studies.
Yeah.
I always think it's really important just to demonstrate what I'm trying to get over
Mhm.
from a teaching point of view using case studies. So we'll have
Yeah.
plenty of case studies. I also have a very much an interactive teaching style, and so I hope that those who are taking part it'll be very much a discussion as well, because the people who who are on this talk today, and the people who come to PRCA training courses are PR professionals in the main. We have students, of course we do, but in the main, they are PR professionals who have been working in their fields maybe for a decade or more, 5 years, whatever it is. And they do know what they're talking about. But sometimes you need to come on these courses just to refresh and
Yes.
think, I haven't done that for a long time. I need to do that. I need to shake up my stakeholder matrix for public affairs.
Yeah.
I don't know who my local councillor is. I don't know who my local council leader is. I don't know, if something happened in your local area or one of your local areas, you do need to talk to your local council.
Mhm.
When a crisis. So it's a refresher,
Yeah.
but it's also for those who've never been involved in public affairs, I think it'll be a really interesting course to
Mm.
get you thinking about what you need to do when you go back to the office and persuade whoever you need to persuade, whether it's in the agency and you're an agency and you're working with clients, or whether you're in house, about persuading your powers that be that actually they do need to take crisis management seriously, public affairs angle seriously, and put resource behind it.
Mhm. We've had a question that's come in. I'll read this one out. It's talking about case studies. So would you have an example or case study that springs to mind, of a time when an organization has used public affairs adeptly with positive impact for a crisis?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's a very, very old case, and it's so old, it's like 50 years old now.
Still be good though.
But it's still classic. It's still a classic one, and it's the Johnson & Johnson Tylenol um, uh, product, which is a painkiller.
Yeah, in America.
And somebody, or I think it was, I don't know if it was one person or not, but they contaminated a whole batch of Tylenol, and it was before the screw caps. It was
Mm-hmm.
just easy, and people died. I think 5 or 6 people died across America. And what Johnson & Johnson did was very brave and very costly. They withdrew all the Tylenol,
Mm-hmm.
took it off the shelves, destroyed it, and then set about working with the US government and the US medicines regulator to work out how this could never happen again. And that's how we came up with the screw top bottles that we all have now across the world. But it was very much them working with the regulator. They hands up, they didn't hide it. They were very open about what had happened. I mean, people had died. There was press coverage, obviously, but they turned that into a positive, a dreadful story, a dreadful crisis, which could have ruined a company. They turned it around and worked with the Department of Health in the United States and the regulator to find a positive and come up with the screw top, which then sent across a message about the fact that they cared about their customers, that their customers' health and safety, security was paramount. And then they relaunched the product in these new screw cap bottles, and their brand share actually went up.
Very exciting.
And so obviously I think that's a classic
Yeah.
example of how the public affairs team, obviously working with the brand development people and the corporate comms people, work together to
Mhm.
persuade the government to take them seriously, and they did.
Um, we have one last question, just time for one last question. What future do you see for programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion? For example, do you think there'll be a trend for companies to exit these programs given the current international political climate? So,
I suspect we will see less of them. And I've always thought, having led organizations, that you you need to talk the talk and walk the walk. You don't need lots of policies written down and filed. It's about the whole atmosphere, environment that the leadership down portrays. And you've got to ensure that your employment policies are fair, but that they don't, and that people feel supported. But I think we have got to a stage where it's a balance, isn't it? It's always a balance. These things, everything in life is a balance. And if the pendulum swings too far one way, then you get an imbalance. So I do think there will be a reset. I don't think the pendulum will go extreme to the other side. I think it's about balance. It's about ensuring that people feel like they've got a voice, but that management and business owners also have a voice, and that people's rights are different to people's freedoms. And we've all got a responsibility. If we go and work for an organization, we all deserve to be respected. We all deserve to be treated fairly. But we've also got to balance that with what the organization needs to achieve its goals. And obviously, that we do not want to see bullying in the workplace. We do not want to see any form of discrimination at all. But companies also need to achieve, and also obviously with the government current growth agenda, there needs to be some checks and balances. But I'm all for fairness and respect in the workplace
yeah,
and across society.
yeah. I think that might have been an international. I I I don't. I can't ask the person who asked the question for a bit more detail, but I suspect it might have been with the elections in America. But but I
Well,
don't.
we're seeing a very, very different political atmosphere across Europe and
Yeah.
across America, and
Mm.
you know, that's for another webinar
Is
or
it the whole?
Q&A.
We're just running slightly over, so we should probably wrap up. I was going to ask you about your kind of main takeaways, but I think you've already answered that question. So I think without further questions, we'll bring this session to a close. Thank you, Nickie. That was really
Thanks,
insightful.
Louise.
You're great to talk to, really informative. And yeah, thank you for joining us, and thank you for everybody who's joined us today. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye.